So you want to own a bowling alley. On the 19th of October 2023, a landlord paid $432.9 million for 38 of them and never bought a bowling ball. Nothing the customer sees moved. 21.4 lanes in the average house. Rented shoes in every size. House balls on the rack. A fryer. The arcade blinking in the corner. That is the room. Here is what it costs. The land and the shell under one of those centers came to $11,392,000 in 2023. The business inside one, the staff, the leases, every lane, changed hands at $6,424,000 in fiscal 2024. Same kind of room. The empty one cost more. That is the wrong way round. A building with nobody in it, no till open, no fryer on, no league on a Wednesday night, priced above the going concern that fills it. Somebody stood in front of an empty bowling alley and saw more money in the room than in the bowling. What no filing prints is what one lane earns. 2 numbers out of the same 52 weeks. In the year to the 29th of June 2025, the buildings earned $137.2 million before interest and tax. In that same year to June 2025, the interest bill was $196.4 million. Every game bowled, every pitcher poured, every arcade swipe, every corporate party, and every Sunday morning league, after every wage, every repair and every case of frozen mozzarella sticks came up $59.2 million short of the cost of the money standing behind those buildings in 2025. Revenue for the year to June 2025 was $1,201.3 million. The shortfall sat inside a year that big, and that is a whole company averaged. Somewhere under the average, there is a house having a good 12 months and a house having a bad one, and the accounts fold both into a single line. How far apart those two houses sit is the thing an average is built to hide. There is a body that walks into these buildings and counts. In 2024, its inspectors certified 23,718 lane beds across 1,107 centers. Every lane in the country that hosts a sanctioned league gets measured, oiled, checked, and written into a file. The approach, the pitch, the oil pattern laid down that morning. Somebody signs for all of it. Not one of those inspections records $1. The counting that exists measures wood. The counting that would tell a buyer whether one house can carry itself is nobody's job, and no law requires it. So the accounts hand over $549.9 million of bowling for the year to 29 June 2025 as one line. One line for every lane and every building, from a Friday night in December to a Tuesday afternoon in June. What happens on a single lane stays where it is, which is nowhere, until the end of this. Start with the natural assumption. A company running 365 locations owns them, the way a farmer owns a field. It bought the buildings. It holds the deeds. The rent it pays is rent it pays to itself, which is another way of saying it pays none. Here is the part that surprises almost everyone. Of the 359 United States locations open on the 29th of June 2025, 345 were leased and 14 were owned. 14 out of 359. Those 14 are the exceptions, the ones the company holds outright. Everywhere else in the country, the lanes stand on ground somebody else owns, and the company sends a check for the privilege. You are not buying a room with lanes in it. You are buying the right to stand in somebody else's room, and the terms of that right are where the money actually lives. The master lease signed in 2023 runs an initial 25 years, and the 6 5-year options after it belong to the tenant, not the landlord. So the floor is 25 years and the ceiling is 55. A lease the tenant cannot walk away from and the landlord cannot end. Read those options the right way round. An option that belongs to the tenant works as the landlord's guarantee that the rent keeps arriving after year 25. In every building still worth standing in. And it works as the tenant's obligation for the first 25. In every building that is not. The upside is optional. The downside is signed. The rent written into it for the first year was $31.6 million. Spread across the 38 centers it covers. That is about $832,000 for one center in a year. Now set that beside what the landlord paid for the buildings. Rent of that size against that price is a yield of 7.3%, which is the answer to the empty room. Nobody paid $11 million for a shell with lanes in it. They paid for a piece of paper that produces $832,000 a year. for a minimum of 25 years, signed by a tenant who cannot hand the keys back, priced to yield exactly what the buyer wanted it to yield. The bowling is not the point of the transaction. The certainty is, and the lease is triple net. Property taxes, building insurance, and the repairs to the structure sit on top of that rent, not inside it. The roof over those lanes is the tenant's problem. So is the parking lot. So is the tax bill the year the county reassesses the block. Everything a landlord normally carries has been walked across the table and set down on the operator's side of it. So what does the door cost? 3 prices, all real, all inside the same 3 years, and they do not agree with one another. Price 1. The land and the shell under one bowling center in the October 2023 sale, $11,392,000. Price 2. On the 1st of July 2025, the same operator went the other way and bought back 58 buildings it had been renting for $306 million. 306 divided by 58 is 5.28, so about $5.28 million a building in 2025. Price 3. In fiscal 2024, the trading businesses of 14 bowling locations changed hands for $89.9 million. 89.9 divided by 14 is 6.42, which is about $6,424,000 each, and that price carries the staff, the leases, the licenses, and every lane in the building. Set them in a row. A building at $11,392,000 in 2023. A building at $5.28 million in 2025. A whole working business at $6,424,000 in fiscal 2024. The caveat before somebody catches it: those 3 prices are not measuring the same thing, and I am not going to pretend they are. A sale-leaseback price is set by the rent the tenant has just agreed to pay. Run that rent back through the yield the buyer wanted, and you arrive at the price. The building is almost incidental to the sum. Buying property back is a negotiation with a landlord who knows perfectly well you are not leaving, and a going concern is priced on what it earns, which is exactly the thing worth noticing. Not one of those 3 numbers was set by the lanes. Here is the part that catches people out. You would expect the machinery to dominate the cost of entry, the pin setters and the ball returns and the scoring and the wood. None of it sets any of those 3 prices. The machinery turns up somewhere else entirely as a running bill. $141.1 million of cash went into property and equipment in the year to 29 June 2025, which across 365 buildings is about $386,000 a building a year. Every year. That is not the year you refit a house. That is the ordinary year, the one where nothing goes wrong. The buyback tells you what the rent was worth to the people paying it. 58 buildings, $306 million in July 2025, and what the operator got for the money was not 58 bowling alleys. It already had those. It had been trading out of them for years, opening them every morning and locking them every night. What it bought was the end of 58 rent obligations. And notice what you have bought at the end of all 3 prices. Not a freehold in 345 cases out of 359. A trading business, some machines with a service life measured in decades, and a signature on a lease that outlives most marriages. Now the bills. Every cost in this building behaves the way a hotel's costs behave. They are set before the doors open, and they do not care how many people walk through them. A dead Tuesday and a packed Saturday cost exactly the same to be open. Start with the rent, and here is the part that trips people up. The rent line in the accounts understates what occupancy costs because the accounts scatter it. Gathered into one figure, every form of occupancy cost came to $262.5 million in the year to 29 June 2025, which is 21.9% of revenue, or about $719,000 for one building in a year. Part of it sits in rent. Part sits in interest because some of these buildings are financed rather than rented. Part sits in the write-down for where. One cost, 3 places, and only somebody who gathers all 3 ever sees the real number. Then the running of the place. Location operating costs, which the filing defines as rent, utilities, insurance, repairs and maintenance, property taxes, supplies and marketing, were $375.6 million in the year to June 2025. The write-down for wear on lanes, machines, and fit-out was $156.9 million in that same year to June 2025. Then the people. Wages and benefits for the staff inside the buildings were $284.1 million, about $778,000 a building a year. 12,565 of them across the company, with a house typically running a general manager, 2 operations managers, a facilities manager, and 20 to 30 associates. Then the money. Net interest works out at about $538,000 a building a year. That one arrives whether anyone bowls or not. Add 3 of them together. $719,000 plus $778,000 plus $538,000 is $2,035,000. $2,035,000 a year for one building, on the room, the wages, and the money, before a single pin is replaced, before the first case of beer comes off the truck, before the electricity that turns the machines on. Only one of those costs has a mechanical answer, and the trade has been taking it. The United States Bowling Congress certified string pin setters for sanctioned play from the 1st of August 2023 with a minimum string length of 54 inches after laboratory data put strike percentage 7.1% below free fall machines. That laboratory figure did not survive contact with real play. A scoring study finished in November 2023 found no statistically significant difference, and the 2 kinds of average were made interchangeable. A machine that pulls the pins back up on a string needs far less of a mechanic than a machine that catches them falling, which is the whole of its appeal to whoever signs the repair invoices. Here is the move that looks like generosity and is not. A building whose costs are fixed has exactly one lever when the lanes are empty, and the price of a game is not it. The lever is the price of the hours nobody wants. In the summer of 2025, that lever had a name. The summer season pass passed 200,000 members and more than $10.3 million in sales by the second week of June, already ahead of the whole 2024 program, which brought in $8.5 million. Divide one by the other. About $51.50 a member in 2025. For that, 2 games of bowling every single day, plus free shoe rental from the middle of May to the start of September. Per visit across a summer, the bowling is being handed out. And notice which direction that grew. The 2024 program took $8.5 million across a whole season. The 2025 program was past $10.3 million before the summer it was selling had properly started. Same empty Tuesday afternoons, sold harder to more people earlier. And handing it out is the correct decision. The lanes are already there. The pin setters are already running or already sitting idle, which costs the same. The general manager is on shift either way. The lights are on either way. The rent keeps accruing through every hour of it. A body in the building for $51.50 across a whole summer in 2025 is a body that might buy a pitcher, which is where the money actually sits. For the year to the 29th of June 2025, food and drink brought $424.2 million. The line the filing calls amusement and other, which holds the arcades together with broadcast income and rent collected from tenants, brought $227.2 million in the same year to June 2025. Bowling brought $549.9 million in the year to June 2025. Look at those 3 again. The kitchen and the bar, on their own, are within striking distance of the lanes. Put the arcade beside them, and they clear the lanes comfortably. So the pass works nothing like a discount. It is the building admitting what it is for. The lanes are the reason people walk in. What happens once they are inside is the business. Work out what that means for the person running the place. Every hour of staff time spent turning the lanes over faster is an hour spent moving people toward the bar. The lanes are the queue. The kitchen is the till. 2 games a day, all summer, for the price of a large pizza. That is a company that has worked out precisely what bowling is worth to it and priced it accordingly. Now the number nobody has to print. 1 building, 1 lane, 1 year, and every figure in dollars. The average house took $3,291,000 across everything it sells in the year to the 29th of June 2025. Bowling was $549.9 million across 365 buildings. 549.9 divided by 365 is 1.5066. So about $1,506,600 of bowling in that average house in a year. Spread across how many lanes? Back to the inspectors. 23,718 lane beds, 1,107 centers, and 23,718 divided by 1,107 is 21.4, which gives 1,506,600 divided by 21.4 is 70,402. $70,402 of bowling from one lane in 1 year. Put that on a week and it stops sounding like a big number. 70,402 divided by 52 is 1,354. About $1,350 a week off one lane, and that has to cover the league night, the birthday party, the 2 teenagers on a Wednesday, and the 4 hours on a Tuesday when nobody comes at all. The caveat, before somebody uses it against me, that lane count comes from centers that run sanctioned leagues, which leans toward traditional houses. The revenue comes from a company that also owns water parks, and a water park has no lanes at all. This is the right order of magnitude. It is not one house's books. Now the 3 bills that follow the room rather than the game on the same per lane basis in the same year. Payroll, 778,000 divided by 21.4 is 36,355. Occupancy, 719,000 divided by 21.4 is 33,598. Net interest, 538,000 divided by 21.4 is 25,140. Add the 36,355 plus 33,598 plus 25,140 is 95,093. And here is the part that rearranges the whole picture. Set that against the bowling. 95,093 minus 70,402 is 24,691. Every lane in that building runs $24,691 short in a year against 3 bills that were never a function of how busy it got. Before a pin is replaced, before a drop of oil goes down, before anyone has done anything wrong. One honest note on the interest before moving on. Borrowing sits at the parent company, not in the building, so no manager in any of these houses is ever handed that particular invoice. It is an allocation. But somebody pays it, and it is paid out of what these buildings earn. Now scale the gap back up to the whole house. 24,691 times 21.4 is 528,387. Every year, that average building needs $528,000 out of the kitchen, the bar and the arcade, purely to cover what the lanes did not. That is the figure no filing prints. And now the reason nobody is in a hurry to print it, it is fairly plain. Because it does not mean the lanes should go. Every one of them still has to be there, maintained, oiled, certified, and lit, staffed on a Tuesday when 4 people come in. Take the lanes out, and the building is a bar with an unusually long floor plan and no reason for anyone to drive to it. So the lanes lose money, and the lanes stay. That is not a contradiction. That is the job. So when does this break? Not in a bad year. That is the part that catches people. The 52 weeks ended the 29th of June 2025 closed with a net loss of $10 million. Not a collapse, not a crisis. A loss of $10 million on a business of that size is the kind of number that means the machine is running, and the machine is not quite covering itself. Underneath it, one line moved in a way nothing else did. The money set aside for injury, health and workers' compensation claims went from $19.5 million to $55.1 million in a year, close to tripled in 12 months. And that is the gross figure, before any of it comes back from the insurers who cover the layer above the company's own. Underneath it sits a business that has chosen to carry the first slice of every accident on its own floors, which is cheaper in most years and is not cheaper in a year like that one. That is what a room full of strangers looks like written down. Heavy objects thrown at speed, a polished floor, rented shoes on people who own none and have not worn a pair since last year. Alcohol served alongside all of it. Children. Every one of those is a claim waiting to be filed, and the company carries the first slice of each one itself before any insurer picks up the rest. Nobody plans for that line. It appears in no model of owning a bowling alley that anybody has ever drawn on a napkin. It arrives anyway. Now look at what happened 11 days after those books closed. On the 1st of July 2025, $306 million went out to buy back 58 buildings the company had been renting. Sit those two facts next to each other. A year that ended in a loss, and the response was to spend $306 million. Not on lanes, not on machines, not on a single new location, Not on a new market, not on anything a customer would ever notice. The largest check written that summer went to the landlord problem. When the rent is the thing that hurts, the only permanent cure is to stop being a tenant. It is also the most expensive cure on the shelf, and it works one building at a time. That is what breaking looks like in this business. Not an empty car park, not boarded windows. A full Saturday, a working kitchen, a car park with cars in it, and underneath all of it, a fixed charge that outranks every one of them and eventually has to be bought out of the way. Good year, bad year, same buildings. This is the ledger. Take only the locations open in both years, so nothing is flattered by a new opening or hidden by a closure. That is 326 of them. In fiscal 2024, those 326 buildings took $1,029.3 million. In fiscal 2025, the same 326 buildings took $990.7 million, a fall of 3.7%. 3.7%. On paper, that is a rounding error with a bad haircut. Put it per building. 1,029.3 divided by 326 is 3.1573, and 990.7 divided by 326 is 3.0389. So $3,157,000 of revenue in a year in the good one, and $3,039,000 in the bad one. $3,157,000 minus $3,039,000 is $118,000. $118,000. One building. 1 year. Same lanes, same car park, same staff clocking in on the same Tuesdays, doing the same job to the same standard. Here's why that is worse than it looks. Nothing on the cost side moved with it. Occupancy still ran about $719,000 for that building in a year. Wages about $778,000 a year. The rent does not come down 3.7% because the takings came down 3.7%. It is a number written into a contract. So the whole of that $118,000 a year comes off the bottom, not off the top. There is no slice of margin for it to come out of. It is the margin. Set the two columns side by side and subtract only the two bills that never move. Good year. $3,157,000 minus $719,000 minus $778,000 is $1,660,000. Bad year. $3,039,000 minus $719,000 minus $778,000 is $1,542,000. That is what is left to cover everything else. The food cost, the machines, the write-down for wear, the money standing behind the building. It drops from $1,660,000 to $1,542,000. The gap comes through the subtraction untouched, because the subtraction is identical on both sides. That is the thing about a fixed cost. It is exactly as fixed in the year you needed it to move, which is why the kitchen matters more than the lanes. Widen the frame to the whole company for a moment, water parks and family entertainment centers included, because that is the honest scope of the next two figures. Food and drink cost $94.6 million against $424.2 million of sales in the year to June 2025, which is 22.3%. On that same company-wide count, whose denominator holds buildings with no lanes in them at all, bowling came to 45.8% of what walked through the door. Read those as an operator rather than an accountant. A dollar through the kitchen keeps roughly 77 cents of itself before anybody is paid to cook it or pour it. A dollar through the lanes has already paid for the wood, the machine, the oil, and the mechanic on its way in. That is the whole thing in two columns. A good year and a bad year sit $118,000 apart inside the same four walls, and not one of the bills underneath them noticed the difference. The only lever big enough to close a gap that size is what you sell to the people who are already standing in the room. Back to the 19th of October 2023. 38 bowling centers changed hands for $432.9 million in 2023, and not one bowling ball moved. What the buyer took was the room and the rent, about $832,000 a center in a year to start with on 25 years, with 6 5-year options standing behind it. What the operator kept was the game. By the 29th of June 2025, 345 of its 359 United States rooms belonged to somebody else, and every form of occupancy cost in that year came to $262.5 million. And the number this started with was in no filing, so it had to be built out of 3 others. $70,402 of bowling from one lane in a year. Standing against a room, a payroll, and a borrowing that never once asked how the lanes were running. Nobody is required to print that figure, so nobody prints it. The accounts that survive are the landlords, not the operators. That is true of most trades, and it is exactly why the shape of this one is so easy to get wrong from the outside. So the next time you are at the counter in a pair of rented shoes, waiting for lane 9, look past the lanes. A bowling alley is not a building full of lanes. It is a rent bill with lanes inside it. And everything on that floor, the fryer, the arcade, the pitcher of beer, the birthday party in the corner, is there to service it.